Okay. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to introduce today Julio Chaname, who is an associate professor and director of graduate studies at the Institute of Astrophysics of Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. Julio graduated in physics from PUC Peru and then moved to PUC Chile for his master's. He obtained his PhD in 2005 from the Ohio State University in the United States, and then was a postdoc at the Space Telescope Science Institute and a Hubble Fellow at the Carnegie Institution of Washington. Thank you so much, Julio, for accepting our invitation. You may start when you're ready.
Thank you, Anna. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Anna, very much. Hello, everyone. I am very glad to be able to speak to you today. I haven't been in Porto Alegre yet. Hopefully this will be this first and only visit virtually. Hopefully sometime I will be there in person to meet you all. So thank you for the nice introduction as well. So yes, let's get to it. Today, I want to tell you about wide binaries, very wide binaries, and specifically we'll try to focus on a few problems on what we call this field of near field cosmology. Okay. And before doing that, I just want to highlight the people that I work most on this subject. Jeff Andrews, Marcela Agüeros in the US, also Andrea Bellini, Jorge Peñarrubia, and all these people also here from Virginia, the University of Virginia. Do you guys can see my mouse moving? Because that would be important.
Yes, we see it.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's get to it. I will start making a brief introduction of what I mean about these wide binaries, okay? And then I will move to some applications and the subject, the core of this talk. So wide binaries, here in this plot here, I'm showing the distribution of periods, okay, of binaries in general in our solar neighborhood in the galaxy. And specifically, this is a pretty old work, but this is basically correct. We have this sort of Gaussian distribution in these coordinates. And typically, so you can have here, for example, a very well-known example, the Sirius system, bright star in the north, orbited by here, this carbon star is a white dwarf actually. And the period of this binary is around 50 years, okay? So we actually, in a human lifetime, can actually see the two stars go around each other. And this Sirius system lives more or less close to the peak of this belt, of this distribution. But these are typically what I call close binaries. Okay, wide binaries are the other extreme of things, in the other side of the distribution. Okay, and just so you put so I put some numbers in your head. You can take, for example, here, you know, around here, this region, a typical wide binary separated by, say, 2,000 astronomical units. So I'm interested in put these numbers in your head. 2,000 astronomical units is huge, of course, for a binary, but these things exist. So at this separation, okay, already the orbital period is about 100,000 years. So clearly there's no chance that humans, right, even civilization yet, has reached this time scale in order to be able to see the two stars go around each other, okay? And if you consider, let's say, the two stars in the binary are of solar mass, this means that the orbital velocity, okay, of this system will be of the order of 1 kilometer per second or even less, okay? And this is why I call the non-violent end of this distribution in opposition to things like here, where actually you could have explosions and stuff like that, very violent. Here, this end is very non-violent, very soft, and that's actually the interesting aspect as you will hear in a few minutes. So typically, historically, the way we identify these wide binaries, therefore, since we don't have enough time to see the two stars go around each other, is simply by doing this. So I'm flipping between two images of the same region of the sky, separated by 50 years. Okay, these are post plates, as it says there. And you can see that these two stars here are moving with respect to the background stars, right? After 50 years, they have moved. And they not only have moved, but they have moved in the same direction at the same relative speed, and moreover, the relative position between them hasn't changed in over 5 decades. This means that they are associated, and not only that, their orbits must be very, very long, much longer than these 50 years in between these two pictures. Okay, and this is the white binaries that I'm talking about in our galaxy in particular. Okay, so let's go to, of course, more modern times. Now we have Gaia, right? This beautiful experiment, this beautiful, amazing telescope, and this is the way now we see things or we identify these white binaries in these catalogs. I'm going to show here in these upper panels an actual white binary, what we consider today a real white binary, and here something that is not necessarily a white binary. And you can see here I'm plotting the proper motions, okay, as measured by Gaia, okay, of two pairs of stars. And you can see, so one pair is in red and the other is in blue. And you can see clearly here, up here, that the proper motions and the direction of the proper motion are very consistent between the red and blue, between the two stars, star 1 and star 2. And here in the bottom, there is some consistency. The proper motions are similar, but not quite exactly or nicely aligned as these ones over in the top. And in the old days, when I was doing my PhD thesis, for example, this one below might have been a good candidate for a white binary. And particularly because we didn't have so beautiful parallaxes, not only proper motions, but parallaxes from Gaia. And if you see at the parallaxes, then here, clearly you can see again in the blue and red star in this pair above are very, very consistent, the parallaxes, but here this one is not, right? So now we have more information and we can put actually these measurements in this kind of plot, which wasn't possible before at these separations. Here in this plot, I'm showing in the x-axis the separation in astronomical units, okay, of pairs. In the vertical axis, I'm plotting the difference in velocity between the two stars, three-dimensional velocity, okay? Therefore, what I'm showing here in blue, in these blue contours, is what simulated binaries that follow Newton's laws should behave like. So what you're seeing here is simply the law of Kepler, one of the laws of Kepler, right? That as separation increases, your orbital velocity has to decrease in this way. Okay, and clearly with these data are represented here in black. You can see that these black contours of confidence intersect the expected region. And this is what we call today a bona fide, a gravitationally bound white binary according to the measurements. However, here, things were close, but you can see that the orbital velocity would not be consistent with what we expect. And therefore, we call this a chance alignment, okay? It's simply an alignment of two stars that apparently move in the sky at similar distances, at similar, velocities, proper motions, but not quite, okay? So this is not consistent with being bound together. And therefore, if I could keep going, if we can add, if we have the availability of radial velocities, for example, which I am not using here in these plots, then you complete the phase space information of these objects and your capability, your ability to tell between this case and this other case is even improved, okay? So nowadays we have catalogs of beautiful catalogs of white binaries. Here, the previous measurements, these ones were based on this work that I did with my colleagues, based on the original or the first data release of Gaia. Now we have DR2 and DR3 is coming up soon. And for example, here you have results from DR2, beautiful. These are all white binaries. These are not single field stars. These are all components of white binaries. And you can see the primaries here, the secondary here. You can see many white dwarfs being involved, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to talk more about all this. This is another catalog also from independent, but also from DR2, from these other people. You can see the primaries, the secondaries, beautiful HR diagrams. Okay, so let's move on to then why do I care so much about these objects? Okay, and what I call the first fundamental property is their versatility. Okay, and what I mean by this versatility, let's call this plot here, this not plot, but this diagram. This is the most basic model you can have of a binary in general, of a white binary also in particular. Typically, you have one star that is brighter than the other. Simply that. And that's because one of the masses are different, as we know. Okay, but this is usually or in general terms, the only difference really between these two stars, because since they are inside a white binary, we know that they actually have formed together, and I will speak more about this issue later. They have formed together, they have the same ages, for example. Everything else is shared in between the two stars. So the distances, they are at the same distance from us. They have to have the same radial velocities as well, because the system is bound. They have to have similar compositions and similar ages. Okay, and this property, as simple as it looks, really gives you a huge versatility for many astronomical problems, as I will try to show you in a minute. Therefore, what I want to convey with this simple slide is that whatever in a white binary, whatever you can measure on one of the stars, you can safely assign to the other. Okay, even in the case where that property that you're talking about might be impossible to be measured for a given star, for example. Okay, because if it is too faint, or because it is a special object like a compact object, for example, etc., etc. And we can, and this simple property really gives us a lot of versatility and a lot of possibilities to work. And I will show a few right now. Okay, I will try to flash quickly about this in these applications, as I call them, because I want to get into this near field cosmology stuff as soon as possible. So, for example, you can have a white binary form in which one star is an M dwarf or a white dwarf. And we know that if you take a spectrum of an M dwarf or a white dwarf, you're not able to easily, at least, to get their metallicities. Okay. However, if its companion is a solar type star, like this one here, you can, of course, we know we can measure metallicities and abundances from this type of solar type stars. Therefore, we can, if it's in a binary like this, with an M dwarf or a white dwarf, we can assign whatever we measure from this spectrum to the other. And historically, this has been the way in which people calibrated originally the metallicities of M dwarfs using white binary systems composed of M dwarfs and solar type stars. Okay, that's one application, for example. The metallicity or the composition was not possible to be measured from this spectra, but they were possible to be measured from the companion spectra and assigned to the other one. And that's the versatility I'm talking about. You can do that for ages as well. For example, here, you have a CMD, and if you have a white binary pair with a component that is here in the main sequence, and you want to know its age, it is extremely hard to do it, as you probably know well. So it is extremely hard to do it by isochrones, for example. However, if we have a white binary companion that is, for example, in the subgiant branch, this star can actually be well age dated, right? And when doing that, we can assign this age to the main sequence companion. And therefore, we are essentially measuring the age of this thing, which otherwise, if it was isolated, would have not been possible to be done, okay? So we are applying this idea, this simple idea to the concept of gyrochronology, for example, okay? And this is the paper that you can take a look at, for example. A student of mine currently is taking advantage of white binaries with primaries that live in the region of the CMD, for example. These are evolved stars, either Ternov or subgiants, okay? And he's using the fact that these have companions as white dwarf companions, okay? In order to put constraints on something that we call the initial to final mass relationship for white dwarfs, which is an extremely important area of stellar evolution. Summarize it in this plot. In this plot, you have, as a function of the initial mass on the 0-age main sequence, okay, of stars in general, okay, this is the SAMS mass, what is the final mass that the white dwarf in the future is going to have? This is an unsolved problem in theoretical stellar evolution. We cannot compute this easily, okay? And however, so we try to constrain it by measuring things, particularly open clusters here in black. Okay, but you can see that in this end, in the low mass end, where most of the stars actually in the galaxy live, the constraints from open clusters are scarce, if non-existent. So Manuel, my student here, is putting the first constraints using white binaries around here. And now actually the pressure in this area is not anymore on the determining the initial mass of the progenitor of the white dwarfs, but measuring the masses of the white dwarfs today. As you can see, the error bars, the measurements are dominated by the error bars in the vertical direction and not anymore on the horizontal direction. Okay, similar people are doing similar things. These are white dwarfs. Okay, these are the progenitors of current white dwarfs for which they have been able to measure the cooling time, and using an initial final to final mass relation, or a given initial to final mass relation, they can get their masses. Okay, and they have companions, all these white dwarfs, as illustrated here, the mass of the primary, the companion. So measuring the age of these white dwarfs immediately gives you the ages of the companions, which would have been impossible to do if they did not have companions, right? So people are starting to actually map the star formation history, the assembly of the local stellar populations using these objects, for example. This is a huge program in Sloan 5, for example, that I'm participating in as well. So I like this quote from a book I'm sure most students know, if not all, from Galactic Dynamics from Vinian Tremaine. You can look up this quote. Binary stars in our galaxy can be thought of as open clusters with just two members. The simplest example of an open cluster is actually a binary star, okay? And therefore, we can use this fact and the fact that, as I have illustrated, the components of the white binaries have to have the same compositions in order to do galactic archaeology, okay, specifically with this technique of chemical tagging, okay. And now with this subject, I am finally entering into my promise of talking about near-field cosmology, right? So chemical tagging is a technique that people have been dreaming of for the last maybe 20 years, and currently, finally, they are implementing it in order to understand the assembly of populations in the galaxy and how galaxies like ours form. So it is important. And the way we have been exploring this subject using white binaries, you can see here, for example, a set of about 30 white binaries taken from Apogee, from a previous data release of Apogee, okay? And so we looked at their compositions in particular. And you can see here, in this plot, this is a very important plot, although very simple as well. I am plotting here the metallicities, the iron abundances of one of the components against the other one in these binaries, from these binaries. And you can see that they clearly align, showing that their metallicities are usually the same, essentially, within the error bars of the surveys in this case. Okay, this demonstrates already, or my original claim, that these things form from the same material and probably also at the very same time. Okay, this is a demonstration of that and allows us to use them in all these applications that I was talking about. So that was metallicity only, but Apogee provides us many elements. And you can see here, this is the dispersions we found in those 30 binaries from Apogee, very small ones. This kind of information is a required information for any chemical tagging experiment, because chemical tagging has been typically tried with clusters. And here I am showing the metallicities of clusters at which previous attempts of chemical tagging have used. And you can clearly see that these red arrows, these are the clusters, okay, open clusters, are spanning really only the metal-rich region of our populations. Instead, in blue, I am showing the metallicity distribution of some catalog of white binaries, and you can see it spans a much larger regime. We know we have metal-poor stars in the galaxy, so if we cannot study chemical tagging here or calibrate it here, the promise is not as great as in this region, for example. Okay. Therefore, this is why I've been trying to argue that white binaries, being small clusters, can be used also for these things that open clusters have been used historically for. Okay. Now, an important issue in the white binary community, or in research on white binaries, has to do with their formation scenarios, how these things form. It is an open question still. Okay. And what I want to convey here is that measurements of these metallicities of chemical abundances with good precision for as many as possible white binaries help us, inform us on what the formation scenarios could be. Okay, which of the possibilities for these formation scenarios, which I'm not going to talk about, really is the most adequate one, the most realistic one. And also, what I want to show examples, for example, in this context of binaries, in which this agreement is not so quite, it's not quite so nice. You can see, for example, here, this is the difference in the vertical axis. Okay, for a given pair of stars, a very well-known binary, white binary in the sky. These are the differences in the abundances for several species. Okay, these species, and you can see 0 is here. Okay, and all these species have differences between the two stars of about 0.2x. We can measure these abundances much better than 0.2. So clearly, this is not a question of errors in our measurements. These are two stars in a white binary that indeed have this kind of difference in the chemical abundances. However, it is a well-known white binary. We have all the confidence that they are actually two stars orbiting each other, okay? But still, nature is able to produce these things. So we need to understand how, why, and of course, any formation scenario has to be able to explain these possibilities as well, okay? So going on, this is a similar plot as before, okay? So for many elements, the difference in their abundances between the two stars in binary, in a binary, this is a different binary, but now I plot as the differences in abundances as a function of what we call the condensation temperature. So here we have light elements at low condensation temperatures, and here you have heavier ones, okay? And you can see this trend, clear trend, right? So it's, to my eye at least, is something that we need to explain. This cannot happen randomly, and people have been working on this and proposing the idea that maybe this is the signature of terrestrial planets having been formed around one of these stars of the binary, for example. So the terrestrial planets, the idea is that the terrestrial planets might be removing this material, this heavier material, okay, from the star, from the host star. And its companion that did not form terrestrial planets is showing these differences in abundances. So clearly also you have impact here on exoplanetary science. All right, so let's keep moving then. This is my message about galactic archaeology using chemical tying. I hope I argued convincingly that these white binaries are extremely useful proofs of these techniques. But there are caveats, okay? In particular, you have to beware of fake binaries, okay? What do I mean by fake binaries? I mean contamination, but things that are not necessarily binaries. Okay, and let me explain this a little bit here in these plots. This is the same catalog of white binaries that I was using from TIGAS, from the first data release of Gaia. So you can see here as a function of separation on the sky, of projected separation, the difference in radial velocities of these binaries. Now, these binaries were not selected using radial velocities. They were selected only using astrometry, just proper motions and parallaxes. Okay, so the measurement of the radial velocities of the stars actually provide us with a check of their reality. Okay, and you can see as a function of separation how they behave. You can see clearly that most of the white binaries within some regime of separations, up to this line more or less, here in blue, have radial velocities that are consistent between their components, consistent within each other, okay? Therefore, this is what we expect for a real white binary. And things that deviate from this consistency is what we call chance alignments. And you can see that more or less from this separation in gray, you can see that the distribution explodes more or less, right? Telling us that at the largest of separation, the contamination from things that are not related to each other, simply a chance alignment, okay? An alignment by chance, random, is dominating the sample, okay? And here you can see the distribution of the blue points against the orange points as a function of separation. You can see clearly the contamination increases with separation. It's a key point to identify this kind of contamination in any catalog of white binaries. And simply it goes up like this with separation, simply because the wider you go, your area in the sky is increasing to some power, right? To the power of the square of the distance of the angular separation, and your chance contamination, your contamination is increasing with that same power law. All right. So, however, at large separations, you still have pairs that who show radial velocities that are consistent. Okay, and there is the question today in the community whether these ones here, I think this one in orange here, very different in radial velocities, are clearly contamination. But now we have these ones, other at similar separations, but with consistent radial velocities as well. Are these real white binaries? This question is still in the open air. Okay, there may be co-moving pairs, something that not necessarily have an actual association from birth, but there's still some association. This is a question today, okay? And it's a very important question specifically for chemical tagging. I'm going to skip this because I've made this point already. This is an important point. So we have, from our understanding of galactic dynamics, okay, we can define this Jacobi radius or tidal radius for a pair of stars. This means it has this expression. You have here in omega sub g and a sub g, you have the, is encapsulating the galactic dynamics of the solar neighborhood. This is related to the Orb constants, okay? So related to the tidal field of the whole galaxy in the solar neighborhood, okay? And so this radius has, for two stars of a solar mass, more or less, have this size, okay? This means that at this separation, two pairs of stars in the close to the sun, around this separation, they start to feel the galactic tidal field, okay? And they can actually be broken apart. And in order to put some numbers here, this 4 times 10 to the 4 astronomical units, 40,000 astronomical units, is this gray line that I've been showing from before, okay? At this separation, if you compute if you compare the tidal contribution to the velocity of the two stars to the orbital velocity from Newtonian expectations, you get about 1/10, meaning that at this separation, the tidal force that the galaxy exerts in the binary has the size of a 10% of the orbital speed. So you can see things are becoming already important, and this binary eventually might be broken. If binaries are broken at some separation, they will start to drift, the two components will start to drift from each other, okay? And this is what we call ionized binaries, okay? And maybe this tail at large separations that grows as you expect contamination does, might be composed, at least a fraction of them, from ionized binaries. And this subject in particular is extremely nice. Identifying these ionized binaries will give us a lot of information about these numbers here, which basically are measuring the underlying gravitational field in the galaxy, in the Milky Way. So extremely cool science. Hopefully with next releases of Gaia, we'll be able to get at these pairs, at these things. So I'll keep moving. Therefore, my point here is that white binaries and co-moving pairs are not necessarily the same, okay? And in particularly, if you want to do archaeology, galactic archaeology, near field cosmology there. And why is this? This is because they might have different formation mechanisms. These things might form differently than this, okay? And here I list a few possibilities that we know of for the formation of white binaries in general. All these point to common origins. However, all the explanations for co-moving pairs at very large separations on the sky have these kind of possibilities, and these not necessarily form together, okay? These guys over here on the left have common origins. All these ideas for how white binaries form imply common origins. However, co-moving pairs, not necessarily the case, okay? We don't know if they have common origins or not. Therefore, beware of using them for chemical tagging or galactic archaeology experiments. That's my point. Okay, so this is what I have so far referred to as the versatility of white binaries. And now I'm going to move to what I call the second fundamental property of these objects. And it is actually the one that I like the most, actually. So for any binary, we know that its binding energy, the thing that keeps them together, the two components, goes like this, right? Inversely proportional to their separation, okay? Therefore, the wider you get in this separation, the less bound the binary is, gravitationally speaking. Therefore, this is what I call the second fundamental property, okay? And what makes these objects, not one particular binary, but the population of binaries, excellent dynamical proofs of the galaxy in all respects. And I will show you here a very simple order of magnitude argument that more or less proves this. You can think of a white binary like this, okay? A separation A, and you can assume that there are perturbers, okay, passing by with this mass, capital M, and at some relative speeds. And let's call this B, right, the impact parameter of this encounter in particular. So we are going to make some order of magnitude estimates of the chance for this object to break up this binary, okay? In order to do that, then, in this limit, if we assume this so-called tidal limit, you can compute the kick in momentum, in velocity, that the perturber gives to the components and compute this difference. This is the impulse that this perturber provides to the binary, and it's easily computed like this, all right? This combination of variables. Now, if you want this kick to break the binary, your condition for destruction will be that the kinetic energy associated to this impulse has to be comparable to the binding energy of the binary. So this is that equation here. And therefore, and you need a third equation. In particularly, in this limit, the closest encounter is going to be very important, the most important one, the one that may break the binary. Okay, and if you can write down this closest encounter like this. If you see this equation, you can see actually that is a rate equation. If you get rid of the square root, you have pi b squared here, which is a cross section. You have a density and a velocity. Density, velocity, and cross section. The product of those quantities give you a rate, right? So the rate of encounters combined with these other relations will give you this other relation if you solve for the separation that this binary should have in order to be broken by this encounter. And it goes like this. You can demonstrate this easily in a napkin. Okay, now the thing is, if you replace here the age of the galaxy, more or less the age of the solar neighborhood, and the typical density of stars in the solar neighborhood, this number comes out as 1/10 of a parsec. Okay, what this means is that you don't expect, after 10 billion years of evolution of the solar neighborhood, to find many white binaries more widely separated than this. All right, this is a very simple argument, it's not new. In 1985, actually, these people, these are not small names, as you know, but Carl Hatt Remain wrote a beautiful paper in which they use the number of, I think, 10 or 12 white binaries known then from the disk of the galaxy and modeling the survivability of those binaries in a sea of material in the disk. They put what I think are the first constraints ever on the nature of dark matter from astronomy. Okay, modeling these white binaries, they were able to constrain the mass of the dark matter particle to be smaller than 2 solar masses. It's an amazing feat, I think. This is 1 full year before Bohdan-Paczynski actually suggested the use of microlensing in order to go after dark matter in the galactic halo. So, and they call them these DTs, they call them in this paper dark things. So it's really beautiful. So how am I doing on time, Anna, by the way?
Yes, you have 10 more minutes.
Great. So I think I'm going well. All right. So these people were able to do this in 1985 for the disk of the galaxy. However, we know that the problem of dark matter in the galaxy mostly relates to the halo, right, of the galaxy. However, at this time, there were not many halo binaries known. Okay, this had to wait 20 years, more or less, when I had the luck of actually working on this for my PhD thesis. Okay, so we, from some catalogs of stars, we were able to produce for the first time a good sample, a sizable sample of halo white binaries, which you can see here. This was the distribution of separations for 120 white binaries that we selected, okay? This is the disk distribution, this is the halo distribution, and this is the one that I want you to look at. So it's very noisy also, it's important to note. However, if you remember the 0.1 parsec from 1 or 2 slides ago, the 0.1 parsec at the distances of these objects lies more or less around here. And the data was telling us that you had white binaries in the halo, okay, wider than this limit, all right? So this immediately tells us you have a chance here, maybe, of putting some limits into those equations that I put earlier, from which I derived this 0.1 parsec. And in particular, since these are halo objects, then we had the chance to put some limits on the possibility of halo dark matter back then. Okay, so I want to let me see if okay, this is one of the equations that I showed. This was the rate equation, right? Just to put some important ideas in your head. I want to explore the destruction of white binaries, okay, by perturbers, and I'm going to consider here the tidal limit when the impact parameter of the encounters are much larger than the separation of the binary, and the other limit is the Coulomb limit, with the opposite one. Okay, so in the tidal limit, all these equations I already showed, the closest encounter, is the most important one. Okay, and your critical separation comes out like this, and is clearly, as you can see, only dependent on the density of your perturbers, of the things that are encountered in your binaries, the ones that have this capital M mass and this density. Okay. Now in the other limit, however, now all encounters are equally important, not only the closest one. If all encounters are equally important, then you have to sum the contribution for each encounter, therefore the integral here. This integral of the, and if you remember, this thing in parentheses is the same thing here. So here we are summing up all the little encounters, as you can see here in the integral. When you integrate this, you end up with this logarithm of lambda, of your limits of encounters, which is the Coulomb logarithm, therefore the name. You find this in electrostatic as well. And when you solve for this critical separation, now you have this expression, which is still dependent on the density of the objects, okay, of the black holes, for example, if your dark matter was black holes, but also depending on their mass, okay? And this combination is what provides you the constraints that you want, that you are after for the galactic halo in particular. Okay, I'm going to show, and here, Bakal, Hatt, and Tremaine show illustration of these limits. For example, as a function of time here as well, the size of the separation. And you can see in this regime, in the tidal limit, your binaries suffer kicks that are important, like this one, until eventually one breaks it completely. Instead, in the Coulomb limit, all your encounters are important, and therefore it's more like a diffusion process, the breakup of this binary. Okay, it's beautiful simulations 40 years ago. So my point here is that the populations of white binaries are sensitive to substructure in the gravitational potential, and extremely sensitive to this, and therefore they can be used to constrain dark matter in particular. So using this distribution on the left, we came up in 2004 with these limits. Here you have, this is a very important plot in physics actually, the mass of your dark matter particle, okay? And here the fraction of the halo of the Milky Way that can be composed of these kind of particles, okay? And here you have Macho and Eros, the most important back then microlensing experiments, having been ruled out in 2004, all this parameter space above the lines. But there was this other parameter space with no constraints from experimentally speaking. So white binaries were able to close back then this space. Now this has changed a little bit, but I will not speak about that right now. You can ask me in the session of questions if you want. Therefore, back in 2004, we called this paper, this result, the end of the Macho era. That was a fun idea from Yayu here, the first author. All right, so immediately, maybe some people are already wondering if we can use this same idea as simple as it is, in order to constrain dark matter subhalos now, not black holes, but dark matter subhalos. Okay, and I'm going to tell you to end up to end my talk, telling you about something about this. So here I'm showing simply the halo mass function, the subhalo mass function from cold dark matter here in black, right? And then other models for dark matter, and more or less labeled by this, by the temperature, by the mass of the particle that makes the dark matter in these models. So here, this mass function we have proved experimentally, successfully, from astronomy using galaxy clusters and the Milky Way. And they are all consistent so far with a cold dark matter scenario, therefore the success of the theory. But you can see clearly also that the models diverge, not here, but here, in the regime of dwarf galaxies. This is why dwarf galaxies are so interesting to us right now, because different dark matter models really predict different things for dwarf galaxies. So can we use the idea I spoke earlier with white binaries in order to prove these regions? Well, the answer is yes. Okay, with a few colleagues led by Jorge here, Peñarrubia, we did these simulations in which we assume an ultra-faint galaxy like CW1, for example, okay? And we assume it has white binaries, okay? So we asked ourselves, if it has white binaries, how do these white binaries survive during the lifetime of this galaxy, depending on how the dark matter is distributed in the dwarf galaxy? And what we found is this. Here, as a function of time in the x coordinate, you can see, you can just look at any one of these. You can see that the fraction of binaries at T0 here is decreasing with time. Okay, so these white binaries are being broken by the dark matter distribution in this dwarf galaxy. And not only that, but it depends how the dark matter is distributed. So here, hopefully you are seeing my cursor. Here we are seeing the case when the dark matter has a core in the center. And here in blue, you have the case where the dark matter has a cusp in the center. So you know this core cusp problem, very important one in the dark matter community. Excuse me, the white binaries are sensitive to this, according to these simulations, of course. Okay, so this tells us that maybe if we are able to find white binaries in these dwarf galaxies, maybe we can play this game and constrain the abundance and the masses of these dark subhalos in these dwarf galaxies. So can we do that? Can we find these white binaries over there? Well, remember these initial figures that I showed you? This is how we identify white binaries here in the galaxy. But now if you go 100 kiloparsecs away, you are not able to separate these things with current instrumentation, right? That is a huge problem. This does not work for dwarf galaxies if we want to find white binaries. What we want to do is something differently. We have to play a statistical game now. Okay, and I'm not going to talk about this, although you can see John McCall's name here as well. These are results from Sloan, from one of the first renditions of Sloan. This is the distribution, as you can see here in theta, of pairs in Sloan. There are millions of stars plotted here, but this is the frequency of pairs at a given separation in Sloan. Okay, in red, you see what we expect from randomly distributed stars. And you can see that the data in blue show an excess over this random at lower separations. These excess are white binaries, okay? This is an excess in the 2-point correlation function, essentially. Okay, and this is how we can identify white binaries, not by one from common proper motion, but as a population in the signal they provide on the 2-point correlation statistics. So in order to do this in dwarfs, galaxies, we need basically to account for the fact that at the distances that they lie, you know, a tenth of an arc second is already 7,000 astronomical units. These are huge, large, very wide binaries, if you want. So we want something special, and in particularly, we need Hubble. We need something with the best possible angular resolution. Otherwise, we have no chance of resolving these 7,000 astronomical units at least. Okay, so I had a program with HST targeting Ursa Minor. You can see here the programs with the camera, the fields that we took, These are my collaborators. Andrea Bellini was the main man here in this data reduction and analysis. I'm going to show you quickly the results. Beautiful sources for Ursa Minor, more than 80,000. Here is a nice color magnitude diagram. A lot of astronomy can be done here, IMF, stellar populations, etc. But I'm interested in pairs. So, and this is very important slide. If you have read papers from Hubble, like for clusters or galaxies, for example, you have to have read these artificial star tests that people have to do in order to understand their completeness. Right here, these are artificial star tests in order to understand the completeness as a function of magnitude. Right, the fainter you go, the less complete you are. But since we are interested in recovering all the pairs at very, very small, at the limits of what Hubble can do, we have to do new things. In particular, study this completeness not only as a function of magnitude, but as a function of separation of the two sources, and also as a function of the contrast between the two sources. And this is a huge work, and this is something nobody had attempted before. You can see a final example of a completeness map here. You can see here we are complete if the separation is larger and the contrast is not so great. Clearly makes sense. So I'm going to show you the results, and I'm going to end with that. Remember this plot from Sloan. These are white binaries in our galaxy, in our solar neighborhood, and the signature of the white binaries is this bump over what we expect from randomly distributed stars. The result is a preliminary result, really. I haven't published this yet. We are still checking that the data reduction is correct, etc., etc. It's a very delicate job, but I'm going to show you a glance of our current state of things. This is the same diagram here, but for Ursa Minor. The same diagram from Sloan, but for Ursa Minor now. So you can see a similar thing. The data have this behavior. If you look at this red line here in Sloan, is this dotted line here, okay? However, when you take into account this selection function, okay, this straight line that you expect for random becomes this histogram here in thin black line, all right? Because even Hubble cannot resolve everything up to 1 pixel separation, of course, okay? And the data, you can see, is the more solid, the thicker histogram. And you can see there is an excess, okay? And I'm going to blow that up. Same thing, this is what we expect from randomly, this histogram below, and these are the data. This excess looks right now very significant, okay? It looks like one of these bumps, okay? And it might be the signature for white binaries at 70 kiloparsecs from us. And it would be the really a first time. So I'm going to end up with this summary. Hopefully I have convinced you that white binaries are applicable to a very large range of astronomical problems, from fundamental parameters of stars nearby to things of cosmological interest. They are extremely sensitive proofs of the underlying gravitational potential simply because they are white and can be easily broken, okay? And specifically, the detailed shape of their semi-major axis distribution is what we want to really measure, okay? It's fundamental interest. They have large potential for constraining the properties of dark matter in dwarf galaxies, as I hopefully have argued. We may have discovered the first population of white binaries in a galaxy other than the Milky Way, so keep tuned. And I haven't talked about this other thing in blue, but I can talk about that if there is interest, and I'm going to stop here. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Julio, for your very interesting talk. For the people following the talk on YouTube, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please post them on the YouTube channel. Goodbye.